Hello and welcome everyone to this month's Produce Safety Educators Call, which is focused on tips for remote PSA grower trainings. This is Gretchen Wall, the coordinator of the Produce Safety Alliance, and I'm just going to hop on here and give you guys a few introductions and instructions before I turn it over to the presenters to discuss this afternoon's content. So everyone who joined the meeting today, you will be muted throughout the presentation, but we will have some time for questions and answers. Mostly at the end of the meeting, we have reserved a bit of time for some discussion for those of you who have done Produce Safety Alliance grower trainings remotely to share some of your experiences, and also an opportunity for you to ask questions of our speakers this afternoon. You can use either the chat box or the Q&A. We have them both open in the Zoom interface. So either way of communicating is fine. If you feel comfortable unmuting yourself or raising your hand to unmute yourself, I believe that the attendees have that ability, but we'll have to confirm that. But regardless, the Q&A and the chat are probably your best options. We also are recording this session and we'll make the presentation available after the call. As usual, it'll be posted on our website probably a day or two from now, and we'll share that through the Produce Safety Educators listserv as well. So thanks again for joining. Today's agenda, we really have some great topics to talk about. I'm going to go through very briefly, this is for PSA trainers, just some quick updates to our temporary PSA grower training remote course policy, and then also a few tips for filling out electronic course evaluations. And then I'm going to turn it over to our presenters this afternoon. And our first presenter is going to be Heather Russell from Cornell Cooperative Extension, who's going to teach us how to avoid Zoom bombing. And then we'll have Connie Fisk, the Produce Safety Alliance Northwest Regional Extension Associate, will focus on general tips for using Zoom tools to engage your remote audience. And if you've attended her office hours over the past month and a half, many of these tips will be familiar to you, but maybe you'll pick up some new tips and tricks today. And then she'll be followed by Jovana Kovacevic from the Western Regional Center, who will describe how they use Zoom's polling to administer both pre and post tests. And then, like I mentioned, we will have some time at the end for some question and some discussion and some sharing of remote PSA grower training experiences. So with that, I just want to go over a few quick updates on our end regarding the temporary PSA grower training course policy for remote trainings. We did update that policy, and maybe one of the PSA team members can drop that link into the chat box for me. We updated that on May 6th. I want you to be aware that one of the biggest changes that we made was to extend the date that that temporary policy will be enacted for. So currently the policy is extended till July 31st of 2020. And we are going to continually assess, how things are progressing with the pandemic and the potential for extending that date beyond July 31st. But for now, you can continue to register remote PSA grower trainings up until July 31st, 2020. In addition, I just wanted to remind all of the trainers who are planning to host remote grower trainings that printed manuals are required for all course participants prior to the course starting. So that may take some additional planning from the shipping standpoint to make sure that those manuals arrive on time. And we can discuss some best practices, but generally, if you're concerned about participants having those manuals, you can follow the UPS tracking to make sure that they have received those manuals. You can also, because you'll be using video on a remote course, you can have them actually physically hold up the manual to show you if they don't have a manual, maybe suggest that they attend a future course. There are a number of ways that you can confirm that, but those printed manuals are really critical to their ability to take notes and have that material right in front of them as you're progressing through the course. And then lastly, one of the things that we wanted to clarify was about return of the evaluations. As you know, with regular in-person PSA grower trainings, there is a paper evaluation form that is provided to all course attendees. In the case of a remote grower training, we've developed an electronic form. It's a fillable PDF. And the requirement is that at least 50% of those evaluations must be returned within 1 week of the course's conclusion. And if there is lower than 50% for 3 courses, the lead trainer status for all lead trainers that are affiliated with that course may be revoked. So we really want you to try your best to achieve that 50% return rate, recognizing that there's always technical challenges and follow-up that's needed. But I think if you spend time at the beginning of the course and then at the end to assist with any technical needs of the participants, that we have seen that those numbers, you can get more than 50% of those evaluations back. And along with that, I wanted to mention 2 resources for those of you who have registered PSA grower trainings remotely. In the after registration email that you receive, there are 2 links to resources that walk through how to fill out those course evaluations. And I think it's really important that you yourself as the trainer become familiar with that process, and also share that process and review that process with any of the course participants, even prior to the course. The earlier the better to get them familiarized with that. But there is a video tutorial that is provided in the after course registration, as well as step-by-step instructions that are both in English and in Spanish. So if you have any questions about the electronic course evaluations, please don't hesitate to reach out to any one of the PSA team members. If you have questions or if you just need some technical assistance, we're more than happy to jump on a Zoom meeting with you and demo that process, and even allow you to sort of play around with it. We can clear out those responses that we receive. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. So I believe that's all the updates I have regarding remote course policies. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Connie Fisk to introduce our first speaker.
Thanks, Gretchen. Next, we're pleased to hear from Heather Russell, who leads IT operations for Cornell Cooperative Extension, from desktop support to business applications and websites. She has been focused heavily on supporting distance learning technology, including Zoom, during the pandemic, as Cornell Cooperative Extension educators transition their offerings to programming remotely. With a background in library science, her professional interests include information architecture, findability and usability of information, and in general, keeping things organized. Heather?
Thanks, Connie. Welcome, everybody. I wish I had a better topic to talk about. It's unfortunate that we have to talk about this topic. But you know, there are a lot of instances of Zoom bombing. I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is and what are some things that you can do to avoid it when you are hosting a Zoom. Next slide, please. Okay, so during a Zoom meeting, so you might end up with someone in a Zoom meeting who is not someone who should be there. So these might be unknown or unwelcome attendees joining your Zoom meeting. This is not a new phenomenon, but it's exacerbated over the past few months when organizations have been using Zoom, and it's sort of one of these things where so many organizations, especially higher ed organizations, are using Zoom that it's just become a hot spot for folks who want to disrupt, who are, you know, trolling and trying to disrupt meetings. So what could unwelcome attendees do? So they could do some benign, but sort of, you know, annoying things. They could be listening in. They could be capturing screenshots. But the biggest problem with these Zoom bombers, and you probably have heard this on the news, is they tend to join a meeting in order to disrupt. So they might join your meeting and show some unwanted video or audio, or mark up a presentation that you're doing, just disrupting, and sort of in general getting in the way of your meeting. Usually these are pretty terrible. It's usually pretty unsavory content, unpleasant content. I won't go into details, but just imagine what people could post. And they have been, at least at Cornell, it's happening all over the board. And so there's been a big push to sort of lock down meetings in order to avoid some of this unpleasant content. Next slide, please. Okay, so so let's see. So these are best practices that I always talk about whenever I'm doing any kind of Zoom training. But it applies very much to Zoom bombing, to the topic that I'm talking about today. So one thing is, if you're hosting a meeting, any kind of meeting, even if it's not a Zoom meeting, if you're hosting some other type of meeting like WebEx or GoToMeeting, it's always good to have a meeting buddy. So if you are presenting the content, you kind of want someone else in the room to deal with all the sort of the technical stuff while you're presenting your content. And when you're setting up a Zoom meeting, you should make this person an alternative host. You'll notice on this meeting, there are a number of co-hosts. They're kind of backing each other up this way. It's this person's job to sort of watch the chat if you're using chat in a meeting, to deal with technical issues if you have any presenters who are having technical issues or attendees. And they have a new part of their job, which is to eject intruders from a meeting if you have any intruders. Another best practice is that you should make, if you have any other presenters besides your co-hosts, you should make them all sort of alternative hosts, or in a webinar like this, make them panelists. So if they are external to your organization, then you have to promote them to co-host during the meeting. You can't do it ahead, but it is something that you can do, or promote them to panelist if you're using a webinar in with Zoom. But it's a good idea, because what this does is it gives certain people in the meeting administrative powers, and therefore you can sort of lock down the administrative powers from everybody else. Things like sharing screens, turning on their videos, doing things like that, renaming themselves. Sometimes we have problems with people renaming themselves during meetings. Next slide, please. So some more best practices. So, so this is not something that we have recommended in the past, but we are recommending it now. If you are running a meeting which is for a large organization, do not post that meeting link directly on public websites or on social media. Now, there are some caveats. If you are accepting registration for a meeting, you could post that registration link, because if you're collecting registration, someone behind the scenes could be watching who registers for a meeting and could actually be moderating who actually gets to get into the meeting. But don't post the open meeting link on public websites, because what folks who are Zoom bombing are doing is they are scraping websites, public websites, and they are just trying. They have programming that just scrapes these links, and they're just trying one meeting after another to see who they can disrupt. Another best practice is to practice ahead. If you're new to using Zoom, and you don't know where all the controls are, it's a good idea to learn that ahead of time. Know where your Zoom controls are. If you have something that happens during a meeting, you want to be able to deal with it. So know where they are. So, your Zoom controls are at the bottom of your screen. There is a setting you can choose in Zoom to have them always show at the bottom of your screen instead of having them disappear as they do, by default. We totally recommend that. Always have, as a host, always have your participant window showing, so you can see who's in the room, and it's easier to get to your participants. And a lot of the controls, which I won't have enough time to go through today, but I'll show you some resources that you can use after this. A lot of the controls are available through that participant panel, so it's good if you just have it up and ready if you need it. And of course, don't panic. Next slide. So one thing I wanted to point out is there is a new, so Zoom has been, hit with this, with all of these Zoom bombing problems, and they have been trying to sort of lock down their software. They've been trying to make it easier for folks to be able to lock down meetings if something happens. There is a new icon for meeting hosts at the bottom of your meeting controls, and that's a security icon. And there are a number of things. Actually, this screenshot is just slightly out of date. There was an update last week which added some more some more functionality to this menu. But it sort of groups all in one place, being able to lock down whether or not your participants can share their screen, whether or not they can chat, whether or not they can rename themselves. You can sort of lock that all down in all the same space. So take a look for that. If you don't have it, you should update your Zoom desktop client. You should do that anyhow, because there are a number of security holes which Zoom has fixed recently. So you can do that from the zoom.us site. Just look for updating your Zoom desktop client. And I think that these slides will be shared with you guys. All of these links will be available to you. Next slide, please. So a couple things just to think about when you're launching a meeting. There are some things as soon as you get into the meeting you should do. You should, it kind of depends who your audience is, but you might want to uncheck people renaming themselves so that you don't have somebody making mischief doing that. One thing that can happen, I heard some chatter on the call before the attendees joined here. One thing that can happen is someone can rename themselves to be the presenter. And then when you're trying to sort of eject someone from a meeting, it's kind of difficult to figure out who it is. So that's pretty common. You can uncheck annotate on shared content. That's when people can sort of use the whiteboard functionality to essentially write on your presentation. You can uncheck share screen for your attendees. For something like a webinar like this, it's already unchecked, but for a regular meeting, it can be available for everybody. And a way that you can promote others to co-host is through the participants menu. So if you need to elevate people to co-host, you can do that there. Next slide, please. Okay, and then there are some things we always hear this, what if I'm in this situation, what do I do? If I need to let someone else present, I can make them a co-host. If someone is showing video that is either advertent or inadvertently terrible, you can stop their video in the participants pane. This is why I say have the participants pane up. You can mute participants. You can mute everybody in one single shot, or you can mute a particular participant if you need to. All that's in the participants pane already too as well. And you can also eject someone from the meeting. So if you have somebody who is disrupting, there is a way to remove them. And it's through the security icon, and you can remove them that way. So it's good to know where these things are. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you're running a meeting and something happens, what do I do? So there are 3 steps, essentially. The first thing is if someone is making noise, any kind of noise, they're playing a video, they're making some horrible noises, one of the first thing is to mute everyone and don't let people unmute. So this is how you sort of get it under control, and you do this through the participants pane. You can, if you figured out who the disruptive attendee is, you can remove them again through the security icon. And another thing you can do, you don't have to always do this, but you might want to, is you can lock the meeting. What that means is you can make it so that no one else can join. After you lock the meeting is no one else can join after that. Now, we don't often do this, at least in a cooperative extension, we don't often do this because we usually have people joining late. We don't want to sort of lock it down. But if you have a problem, you might just want to lock it so that person doesn't try to come back in using a different name or something like that. All right, next slide, please. All right, and these are the links that I promised you. So there are a number, obviously, as you can imagine, since things have been happening, there are a number of ways to keep people out of your event. I couldn't go through the settings, I didn't have enough time, but there is a checklist of settings of keeping your Zoom meeting secure. I recommend you guys hit these or hit other ones that are related to the institutions that you're part of for keeping your Zoom meetings private and trying to reduce Zoom bombing. And I am happy to answer questions at the end, but continue on. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. All right, I'm next. My name is Connie Fisk. Most of you probably already know I'm the PSA Northwest Regional Extension Associate. I'm also one of the developers of the online PSA Grower Training course, and I manage PSA's social media accounts. I've also been offering Zoom office hours for the last couple months for any trainers that have questions about Zoom for their remote grower trainings. And so I'm going to share some of those tips with you today. If you would like connection details for those Thursday office hours, please email me at connie.fisk@cornell.edu. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about engaging your audience using the tools that are already built into Zoom. We all know that audience engagement is a key to training success. So engaged course participants are more likely to stay awake and focused throughout the day. They're more likely to ask questions to clarify what we're presenting. They're more likely to share their experience with others. And it's easier for them to make connections then between what's being taught in the course and what they're already doing on their farm, so that when they go back to their farm, they can identify those produce safety risks and implement practices to reduce those risks. And that's our ultimate goal. Click next, please, Gretchen. Ultimately, engaged course participants are more likely to learn, and that's what we want. So that's the goal. So as trainers, to engage with our audience, we need to make connections with them. And that's kind of challenging when we're teaching remotely because we lose the benefit of that in-person connection. We don't see the eye contact or the body language cues. But Zoom does have a few tools that we can use. They're pretty easy to use, actually, and they're not going to add a bunch of time to our already full agenda. Next slide, please. So earlier, Gretchen mentioned our temporary policy, and the link is in the chat if you want to go back and find that. In the policy, it specifically says, in order to be eligible for the certificate of course completion, participants must be present for all PSA course modules. In order to monitor this requirement, participants must have video capability, and there must be someone on the training team who is monitoring the course participants during the training. If a participant's internet connectivity fails, if the participant does not appear in the web platform after breaks, or if the participant is not engaged during course delivery, they won't get their certificate of course completion. So we take this really seriously. So that's one way that we suggest monitoring engagement, is to watch everybody's video streams. Click next, please, Gretchen. All right, so this is from Twitter back in April. She says, found the kid playing with her dog instead of Zooming with her teacher. She told me not to worry. She took a screenshot of herself paying attention, then cut her video and replaced it with the picture. It's a gallery view of 20 kids, Mom. They can't tell. She's 10. Next, please. So I would argue that if 10-year-olds are gaming the system, there are going to be adults gaming the system too. Next, please. So we need to be monitoring engagement in more ways than just looking at those little tiny videos, right? So I'm going to run through some of those options with you now. Next, please. So for example, you could put up a slide of your state or your region, whoever your panelists are coming from. So for example, for this course, I could have a map, or for this webinar rather, I could have this map of the United States, and I could ask you all to place a stamp wherever you're located. So Zoom has a tool called Annotate, and on my screen it's at the top. And I can click Annotate and then pick a stamp, and I can say, right now I am based here in Nebraska. Okay, so I can do that anywhere though. I can say, oh, and I'm from Central Oregon, and I work for Cornell University, and I got my PhD in North Carolina. So I can place as many stamps as I want, and you don't even know it's me. So that, when Heather mentioned earlier that this can be a distraction tool that Zoom bombers use, that's why. I could place 30 different stamps and you not know. But that is one tool that Zoom has that you could use selectively in your course to get some feedback, to get some engagement with your audience. Next slide, please. So for example, you might have self-check questions, or what we call clicker questions, that you use within the PSA Grower Training course. So maybe you've got some, ABCD, maybe your training team has a set of clickers. Well, you could use these same questions in a remote training. Next slide, please. So instead of having to click A, B, C, or D, I've just created 4 rectangles here, And I would ask my audience members to pick one of those annotation stamps and place it in the box that they think is the correct answer. So maybe I think it's this one, and oh no, maybe I think it's this one. So as the trainer, you could get a feel for how well your audience understands that point before you move on. If a lot of people are getting the answer wrong, then you would know you should probably go back and review before moving on to the next topic. All right, next slide, please. Another tool that was mentioned earlier is the nonverbal feedback. So at the bottom of the participant window, you should have this list of options. You can raise your hand if you want to ask a question. You can click yes or no. You can tell me I'm going too fast or too slow. Give me a thumbs up, thumbs down. You can clap. You can say you need a break, right? So those are all options at the bottom of that participant window. Next slide, please. So again, a way we could use this with, if you have any true false clicker questions, would be to ask your participants to use those yes, no buttons in place of true and false. So in this case, wash water that contains sanitizer will remove or kill all pathogens. Is that true or false? It's false. I could easily, as the presenter, look down that list of participants and see if a bunch of people got it wrong, then I can go back and review that, right? But if everybody got that one right, we're good to move on. Next slide, please. So these are two options in Zoom that you may or may not have turned on already. And the way to turn them on is when you log into your institution's Zoom website. So for me, it's cornell.zoom, right? When you log into that website, you can click on settings, and these options are both under in meeting or basic. So you just go down to annotations and nonverbal feedback and turn those on if you would like to use either of those in Zoom. Next slide, please. And then of course we have chat. So you can measure audience understanding and engagement using the chat box, which is great because it's going to put everyone's name by their comment. So again, you're going to be able to keep track of that as a measure of engagement. But rather than just asking questions throughout the day and having the same 2 or 3 attendees answer like we do in a face-to-face training, sometimes, you know, there's a couple people that know everything and everyone else will be quiet because that person already knows everything. We can use something called 3, 2, 1, go. So we'll let everyone in the class know that they're expected to answer and that this is one of the ways we're going to monitor participation. So we can say, okay, everybody type your answer in the chat box, but don't hit enter until I say 3, 2, 1, go. So this is going to encourage everyone to give their own answer. And again, those attendee names are going to appear next to the answer so we can save that chat to show that everyone participated throughout the day. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a new one. I love learning, and I've been learning so much about Zoom by doing the office hours and kind of paying attention to different professional development offerings through Cornell and other groups over the last couple months. And here's one I learned last week that I just thought was genius. So I was on a call last week and they were talking about remote trainings. It's for a different organization, but what they do is about every hour or so, they take a screenshot of the gallery. And then they save that to a Word doc or a Google doc where they're also recording other observations from their course to keep as a record of who was there, who was paying attention. If it ever comes back that you need to verify that someone was there, you've got proof because you've got their picture throughout the day. And it's also a useful document if you're like me and after a week you've already started forgetting details about your course. This way you've got all those important details in one place. So this is the gallery view I took from last week's Western Regional Center annual meeting. And everyone in the photo knew that a picture was being taken. They just didn't know that I was capturing it too. So that's why everybody's smiling and happy. They all knew their photo was being taken. Next slide, please. So that brings me to my next point. The PSA temporary policy requires that trainers monitor attendee videos throughout the course. But you should make sure that you're letting your attendees know that up front. As an example, here's the title slide from my office hour last week where we talked about this. I make a point to join my Zoom calls 15 minutes before the start time, and I just play some random instrumental music off my phone. I don't play it myself. My phone is playing instrumental music so attendees can check their sound ahead of time. I encourage them to edit their name. I ask for first name, last name. Sometimes I also ask for their location. So we get people in these office hours from all over the United States, and I don't know everybody. So it's nice to know if I've got folks from Alaska and Ohio and South Carolina all on the call. And this week I gave them a heads up about the video expectation. So they had time to look around their room before turning their camera on. So even though it's my office hour, sometimes I need that reminder too. I need a reminder to close the laundry room door and to pick up the dog toys on the floor behind me. So it's good, again, to remind your audience that you are watching them. Next slide, please. Just a couple more recommendations. First, depending on the size of your audience, you may want to ask growers to raise their hand in the participant window and then wait to ask their question until you call on them, just the same way we would in a face-to-face class. This will help them take turns rather than talk over each other. If anyone's in a noisy location, encourage them to use the chat to ask their question, and then have the course monitor bring the question up in case the presenter doesn't see. Again, that's the benefit of having a meeting buddy or a course monitor, is they can let the presenter know, hey, you've got a question, I think we should answer it before we move on. Next, please. Remote trainings are tough. One of the best things about the Zoom platform is the ability to see each other. And I encourage you to think about how you can use the videos to connect with your audience. For example, as much as we like the PSA Grower Training title slide, I wouldn't share that screen during introductions. Likewise, at the end of the module, when you're taking questions, I would switch to the gallery view of videos. It makes it easier for your attendees to see each other, and it's a nice transition between modules. It also helps wake people up. It's easier to focus on the questions being asked and the answers you're giving if the attendees are watching who's talking rather than that summary slide. All right, so that's the end of the tips I wanted to share today. I know I went really fast. So again, if you want more tips or if you want time to practice playing with some of those tools, I encourage you to join me for my office hour. Rob shared my email address in the chat box, so just email me and I'll send you those connection details. Next slide, please. Next, we're pleased to hear from Jovana Kovacevic, Assistant Professor and Food Safety Extension Specialist at Oregon State University, Food Safety Innovation Center in Portland, Oregon. In her current role, Jovana directs the food safety program at the Food Innovation Center, focusing on listeria research, FSMA-related food safety training, education, and outreach activities, and she also directs the Western Regional Center to Enhance Food Safety. Jovana's going to talk to us about using polls in Zoom. Jovana?
Thank you, Connie, and good morning, still morning to my Pacific folks, and good afternoon to all the other folks. I'm just going to share a few things that we learned about using Zoom polls, specifically for Produce Safety Alliance standardized pre and post tests that we use during the grower trainings. Next slide. Okay, so the standardized PSA pre and post knowledge tests have 25 questions, and we have looked through all the questions and tried to group them in specific modules. There might be one or two questions that you're not sure where to fit, but essentially the way we've done it is looking at what are some of the things that we talk about in the specific modules and whether we use any additional supplemental materials that would cover specific questions and answers. So you will have anywhere from 3 to 4 questions per module. So there are 7 modules, and we have also grouped module or 5.1 and 5.2 together. So the way we would run it essentially is prior to your 5.1, we would do the poll, and then the post poll would be after the 5.2. In order for Zoom polls to work, and we've learned this by trial and error, there are a few things that you have to be especially careful. So you will need to require people to register for the meeting. So this will require their name and their email address. And if you want to match the participants to pre and post module, your answers, you have to ensure that anonymous option for polls is not selected, so they cannot be anonymous. If you want to aggregate all the answers, all the pre answers and all the post answers, then you don't have to do this. Initially, when we set this up, we were also told that all the attendees would have to be the users or authenticate, which would require them to open a Zoom account. But later on, we figured out that this is not true. They just need to be registered. We encountered this issue because some of the participants were not allowed to open up their Zoom account, so we had to look into ways. So the good news is they don't have to authenticate. To create a poll for each module, you should have about 14 polls. And as I mentioned, the way we would run it is run a pre-test poll for each module before we start the module, and then a post-test after the module. And like Heather mentioned, it really helps to have a buddy to help you do anything during the training, but especially with the polls as well, because sometimes people are eager to start their module and these can be easily missed. Next slide, please. Another thing is, you will notice if you have done these tests is that pre and post questions are exactly the same questions. So you have to be careful that you don't run the pre-test twice, because then it will invalidate your answers. So clearly differentiate whether the poll is for pre or whether it is for post questions. And the way I've done that is by including the pre at the beginning or in the title of the poll, and post also for the other questions. The polling reports, the reason why this is important is because while you will see the poll name as you're administering the poll, once you actually generate the reports don't have the poll names. I'm not sure why this is not included, but it is what it is. So it is something that you have to be mindful. So you may have to be very creative on how to easily differentiate which answers are pre and which are post. If you can do this by using the timestamp, for example, because you will know when you started your module. So the pre would be before your module, and then post would be after. One thing though is that this requires some really careful and tedious sorting through the generated answers. So what we recommend is that you add an easily identifiable marker at the beginning or end of the questions for pre and different marker or no marker for post. Or you can use slightly different format in your answer choice. For example, A, B, C, and D, you can add for pre, and for other set, you can remove the letters A or D and just have the answer 1, 2, 3, 4. Or add a slightly different format with, instead of A and a dot, you can have A in bracket. So this allows you to differentiate them visually very quickly, and then to sort them in a more efficient manner. Next, please. So how do you add a poll to your meeting? And I should mention that in order to use the poll, like Connie said, there are certain factors or certain options that you have to select in your settings. And for example, the poll is the same. So in order for a poll option to appear in your meeting, setting up your meeting, you have to go into your settings and enable that option. So after you schedule a meeting, so once you have enabled the poll, you will go and schedule a meeting on the bottom, or you will schedule a meeting, and on the bottom you will see registration, email settings, branding, and poll. So if you select the poll, then it will open up and will show this on the next screen, but essentially you will use add button in the top right corner to add a poll. And you can add up to 25 polls. One thing that I've encountered is once you run that meeting then will be gone. And if you select a new meeting or create a new meeting, you will have to manually enter each poll. So to help you with this, if you plan on running the same classes and with the same poll questions, then it helps to save a meeting as a template or save as a meeting template. And then you can use that same template for multiple meetings. Next, please. So this is an example of once you create the poll, the right corner, you will see I've circled the add button, and you can add up to 25 polls. And each, you have a little bit, for example, here you have created 14 polls, and then you have the title of each poll. Here I have all the pre-questions or polls, and then from 1 to 7 and from 8 to 14, I have the post. But again, you can do pre-module 1 and post-module 1 as poll 1 and poll 2. It really depends on how you want to structure this and what will be the easiest. You also have the total of questions that each module has, and then make sure, as I mentioned, this anonymous column is if you want to match the answers for pre and post for each of your participants, and make sure that you have not selected anonymous. Next, please. So this is if you want to click on what the questions, or if you select the poll, it will give you a drop-down menu, and you will see what questions are in each of your polls. So in this example, this is what it will look like. The poll title is included automatically, and then also answer 1, 2, 3, and 4 is also included automatically. Next, please. And here's an example of if you want to add a slight variation in your answer format for a post test. These will be not necessarily noticeable to your participants, but it will add a visual cue so that you know that this was a post test. Next, please. So once you ran your meeting and you are now ready to generate your report, you would go into your reports, or underneath your account profile, you will see a tab called reports. So if you click on that, you will get 2 options: usage reports and meeting reports. Next, please. So if you select the meeting tab, next, please, it will open another window where you will see meeting report and report queue. So next, please. So once you are in the meeting report, you can generate 2 report types: the registration or your poll report. For poll report, select poll report. I believe this is annotated, so maybe just click through. So poll report, and then you would specify date and time range. So no reports may be available only for a month or less, so you want to generate them as soon as possible, but perhaps not too soon. And I'll tell you a little bit about my experience with this. So after you select the date range, then you click on search, and it will, underneath that, it will list all the polls that are available to you. Then you would want to select the class for which you'd like the report to be generated, and you will click on generate. Next, please. So once the report is generated, then you would go to your report queue, and pretty self-explanatory. You would select the download, and it will be downloaded in your automatic download folder, whatever that is on your computer. It will be in CSV format. Next, please. So this is an example of what that report may look like. I have highlighted the first 4 columns will have included headings. So this will be a number, username, user email, and submitted date and time. And then you will get a string of questions and followed by answers. And these generally have to be manually added. So these will not be included, such as question 1, answer 1, question 2, and so on. One thing that I encountered when I first started this is even though my users were registered and that I was seeing the names and everybody was doing the polls and all of that worked beautifully. But then when I went right after my training, I went and I downloaded or generated my report and I downloaded, all I got was a guest notification or the name guest in the username column. So I was not able to match based on the person, the answers that were generated pre and answers that were generated post. And so I spent some time trying to troubleshoot, contacted Zoom, and then also our IT. And a few weeks later, we found out that it takes a little bit of time for Zoom to actually generate full reports. And so it wasn't that it was a glitch in the system, a permanent glitch. It was corrected within a few days or a week. So if you see guest instead of the name, maybe give it a few days and then go back and regenerate your report. Next, please. And a little bit on once you generate these, if you are participating and working with your regional centers, and as mentioned, I'm part of the Western Regional Center, and we work with our trainers to collate and collect all the regional data to help us understand the knowledge gain and the impacts of the training in each of the regions. So if you are doing these in your regional centers and you're sharing your data, we have invited you and requested that you please send the poll reports in Excel format. So once you add those additional headings, you will have to save it and just save it in the Excel format in order to be able to manipulate some of the answers. Please note, we don't need names linked to the pre-post tense answers, but we need to be able to somehow match participants' pre and post test answers. So to avoid sharing names, you can replace participant names with matching number codes, as we typically do with paper tests. If you have any questions about evaluation data submissions specific to your region, please reach out to your respective regional contacts or regional centers. And I've included here the emails for each of the regional centers. And I believe that's it. Next slide. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, Jovana. All right, next slide, please. Now we're going to turn it all over to you, attendees. Have you hosted a remote PSA Grower Training course? And if you have, what could you share with others? What worked well or what didn't work so well? What would you do differently next time? No one's unmuting themselves or typing in the chat. So we'll also take questions for our three panelists. If you have any questions about what we covered today?
So Connie, there were quite a few questions that had come in during the presentation. I know some of our presenters got around to answering a few of those while the other presenters were speaking. So maybe while people are thinking about their experiences and their questions, I'd like to go through a couple of them because I know we have some people who are not actually logged into Zoom and may just be called in. So I was going back to Heather's presentation where she was talking about Zoombombing. Somebody asked about what if the noise source is unknown, and Heather responded that before you mute all, you can see who's making the noise. This is the participant's pane, and you can see who's making the noise by looking at the microphone or phone icon. I definitely recommend you or your meeting buddy try to determine the source of disruption before muting all, then you will know who to boot from the meeting. So that addresses the noise issue. And if you're looking at Zoom right now and I'm speaking, you can see my microphone kind of going up and down. That's the indicator that that's where the noise is currently coming from. We also had a question about if you lock the meetings and someone gets bumped off their internet connection, they cannot get back in. This can be a problem when participants are in rural areas with poor internet service. And Heather agreed. She said for many of the Zoom settings related to turning off functionality, you need to think carefully about your audience before turning them on. So just a consideration if you know people might get you know, cut their connection because of poor internet service in rural areas, that might be a functionality you may choose to not put on for that particular meeting. Somebody asked about permissions to take screenshots. I know this is going back to Connie's engagement options, and she shared that there was a screenshot, and Connie responded that she usually tells attendees up front that they're going to be monitored through their videos throughout the day, and that you don't need written permission, but you should make them aware of that requirement and or expectation. I don't know if you have anything else to add there, Connie.
I just, that it's a PSA policy that your video has to be on for the length of the course, but it's just good practice to remind folks that that is the policy, and that that's how we're monitoring participation. Okay. Your individual institution may have additional privacy requirements that you're required to follow, but that's beyond what PSA would require.
Okay, great. I'm gonna skip one down to Norman's question. He was asking, once you eject an unwanted individual, does Zoom automatically keep them out even if they try to come back in using the same name? And Heather answered this one. She said that there is a setting in Zoom called allow removed participants to rejoin, and definitely turn this off. It is your default settings, which you have to find in when you log into your institution's Zoom site. However, it can be tricky. They can rejoin using a different email address and rename themselves when they come back. They're really persistent, I guess. And this setting will not prevent that. So you may have trouble a few times in a row, but you might want to lock the meeting if that ends up being the case where no one could enter that meeting. There was a question about getting or accessing the gallery view, and there were some resources shared by Don and Connie about how to access that view. I really recommend that if you're trying to get familiar with Zoom, that consider joining Connie's Thursday office hours, because that'll be an opportunity for you to actually get on and practice those skills in the Zoom platform. Why don't I pause here? I see a lot of people have started adding into the chat box about their experiences. Connie, do you want to take over talking about some of those?
Sure. There's a couple different comments in the chat. Sorry, the chat wasn't turned on. Again, some of the Zoom security has changed recently, and so we thought you were all able to chat, but I actually had to turn that on. So if you tried earlier and it didn't work, try it again. The first one here, it says we had 3 assigned roles during each training. The person who was presenting, a moderator for those tech issues, timekeeping and attendance, and then also someone monitoring the chat that helped with those chat questions. It was really helpful to have that third person, so the moderator didn't have too many tasks that they were juggling at once. So that worked really well. So that's a good tip. The next one says we sometimes have issues with participants not wanting to share their responses to questions with everyone, and I've seen that as well. So things like the nonverbal feedback and the chat function, where it's going to associate their answer with their name. You might have less participation if folks in the room are afraid of public sharing of information. So that is one benefit of using polling, is that then you can make it anonymous and they're more likely to give an honest answer and share that way. So that's something to think about. That's all I see in the chat so far. Oh, got another one. It says we have a great training last week. We also had 3 jobs, the presenter, the moderator, and a chat monitor. And it made things really easy. So that's another support for having 3 people instead of just 2 at once. And also that polls were a great way to engage the audience. We had an issue where one of the instructors' connection got funny and wasn't coming through great. So we made sure to always have a buddy to have that presentation up and ready to go in case they had to take over. That's a good tip.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I see we have quite a few questions again in the question and answer that have been answered. So I'm going to hop back over and look at some of the ones that we have given responses to in writing, but share those verbally. So somebody was asking about how you take the screenshot of that gallery view that Connie was showing. And again, Don shared a helpful URL in that the question and answer box about how to capture the screen. Also, Connie notes, and this is the same thing that I use on my computer, it's called the snipping tool, and it'll take screenshots and you can add them to a document at any time. So that's a handy tool as well. There is a question here that I think Dawn was also following up on, but somebody was asking, is there a template, a Zoom template available that has those pre and post test polls and other attendance checks already set up? And Jovana actually responded that she created one for her account and has not tried exporting it or sharing it outside of her organization, but they're going to look into that and let you know. Dawn, I don't know if you have anything else to add. I know you were doing a little follow-up in the chat as well.
Right, so the sidebar conversation says that the North Central region developed a Qualtrics survey, which can serve a similar purpose, and we may be able to share that during the meeting notes.
Okay, great.
I also see in the chat that Angela from the North Central region said, if you're in the North Central region and offering a remote training, they have staff that are able to assist with that technology and serve as your assistant for your course. So reach out to them. The email address is there in the chat.
Okay. I see another really great tip here from Andrea, where she was saying, one thing that I think this is related to if somebody gets locked out or has a technical issue, providing either an email or a text, a phone number to your course participants. So if they're having technical issues, that they can at least text you or communicate with you in some other way to get that technical assistance, or at least alert you that they might be late coming back onto the meeting for some other reason. So that's a great suggestion. I'm still scrolling down here. It's quite a few good questions and comments here. There's a question going back to the polling, and it was a polling that is not anonymous. Do participants see responses from other participants? And Jovana responded to this one. She said, if you choose to show the quick poll results after the poll is finished, the number of people that choose a particular answer will be shown, but not their individual answers. Once you generate the report, that's when you see the individual's responses. Okay. So I think, oh, there's one more here that just got responded to. Annalisa was sharing that they had a great experience using polls within the modules as clicker questions, and that really woke people up, and they liked having them to actually think about the content, and they usually did about 2 to 3 per module. And I would agree, we also did a training with University of Vermont, and I think that was a great way to keep participants engaged with those poll questions. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the chat. Anything in there, Connie? Or anyone else on the team?
Jovana posted, they also have the pre-post test available in Qualtrics for the Western region. So email Jovana if you'd like it in that format.
There's
And then
also
Bonnie asks if these trainings have been held one day or over several days, and I've seen both.
Yep. I would say I've been getting a lot of positive feedback about the several days, especially knowing that many growers are in the middle of production season right now. The course that I was involved with, we did 2 afternoons broken up over 2 days, and that seemed to work really well. I know we also had a colleague in Puerto Rico that I think broke hers up over 3 or 4 days. So smaller chunks of time. The challenge with splitting it up is then you have to ensure that each person is attending all of those modules. So if they end up not showing up for the second day, you know, they won't be eligible for that certificate of course completion. Dawn, I heard you chiming in there. Do you have something to add?
No, I just hit it in the Q&A and in the chat box to share Connie's office hours link.
Great, thank you.
This is Betsy. There's a question from Mike that I'm typing an answer to now regarding the online course. And I would say the evaluations from the online course are looking very good. The difference with an online course versus remote or in person is that the online course has more responsibilities for the participant. They actually have to do required discussions, and there are things that they have to turn in. So I'm very confident in the evaluations we're seeing from the online course, but it is different than the remote or in person. And the people signing up really need to realize that, since there's different expectations.
And if I can reinforce, advertising a remote delivery as remote delivery, not as an online course, would be very helpful.
Yep, good point there. It looks like there's a question from Jeanette. Have you had any participants that were not invited trying to be in these meetings? We did not allow using, oh, it just disappeared. Someone was answering that.
Sorry, I was typing.
Okay.
I was just answering to say that the event we were talking about, the Zoom link was posted publicly. It was just shared on a website. And that's why we really recommend registering to attend a Zoom and then getting the link sent via email after registration. So you know who's there and they can't just pop on and wreak havoc.
Great, thank you. There was also a question about, can we have this information in Spanish soon? That is a great question, and I'm assuming you mean this particular presentation. So we can definitely talk to Laura about potentially making this information available in Spanish. I'm not sure about a presentation. We'll have to talk about that as a team, but we can certainly consider translating these slides if that would be helpful to you and other trainers who work with Spanish-speaking audiences. Andrew was asking, on average, how many attendees have been showing up for the trainings? I think for the most part, remote trainings have been kept relatively small. And when I say small, I'm saying anywhere from 5 to 20, although I believe Donna was just involved in one with slightly more than 20. I can't remember, Donna, you'll have to chime in, but generally the feedback has been from trainers that it's much easier with a smaller group of people. People are more able to chime in and engage when you have smaller numbers for remote trainings.
Yep, I can chime in here. Last week, we had a training with 21 people, and I think it seemed very successful. I've not read the evaluations yet, but we had, for a entire day training, we had, I thought, some really great questions and engagement. And I would just second a lot of what the other presenters kind of had mentioned, using polls and other engagement activities. And I think the other thing that made it what I think successful was having a large number of support staff. So like some of the comments mentioned, we had monitors on the chat, we had a moderator, somebody to make sure that all the polls were being done, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we had a pretty large training and support team, and that definitely made it go much smoother.
Yeah. There's a question here about how are the initial evaluations from remote trainings looking? And I'll just say that we haven't fully processed those yet. We are receiving them, and I know Rob Way is on the phone. He's the guy who's on the other end of that little drop box that those evaluations go to. So he's the one that's often troubleshooting those and taking a look at them to make sure they've been filled out. So Rob, you might want to share some of your observations, because I know the PSA team hasn't looked at those fully yet, but we do plan to take a look likely at the end of this month, just because so many courses were happening in the last 2 weeks and coming up in the final weeks of May. So we're gonna get a larger sample size. But in general, I feel like the feedback has been pretty positive. A minimal number of disruptions from internet connectivity and things like that. I think trainers are doing an exceptional job outlining, you know, what requirements, technology requirements, internet requirements, expectations for actually being present on the meeting. I think everyone's doing a really great job of that. You know, we're definitely seeing some comments coming back. There is a new question on the remote training evaluations about manuals, and it seems like there is some shipping issues and delays where some participants may not be receiving their manuals in a timely fashion or not at all. So that is definitely a problem we're going to be continuing to look into. But I welcome Rob or anyone else on the PSA team who have looked at remote course evaluations to share observations.
This is Betsy. I will also say that the PSA is aware that the evaluation is causing some trainers a little bit of heartburn. So we are working on addressing that as well. I've only looked at a couple of batches of evaluations, and they looked good in the sense of overall where people were rating the trainings. But I do want to say that we are hearing from the trainers about their concerns about the evaluation. So we are working on that.
Yeah, I think that sums it up well. Both what Betsy and Gretchen said. This is Rob Boy. I'm the guy on the other side of that Dropbox. One thing I think I will add too is I'm seeing a lot of comments though that the participants are really appreciative of having this opportunity to get this training done, given the current situation that we're all working through. So I thought I would pass that on because I think that's a lot of hard work for the trainers, and I think it is showing. So that's a nice comment.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, Rob. There was another question that came through in the chat. Are there any hands-on activities, for example, visuals during Zoom trainings other than interactive asking of questions that people have been using? And I think there are quite a few things, especially because you have internet connectivity that you can pop out to during a training. So for example, in module 5.1, where we typically talk about sanitizers, that sanitizer tool that was developed by PSA is a great one to demo since you're already going to be screen sharing. Trying to think of some other ones. I know Christina Sweet from Vermont actually did a hand washing demo, but instead of using glow germ, she actually used colored dye on gloves. So that was a little more visible to participants on the screen. So that was still very useful. Anyone else from the team have seen some other activities besides polling?
One of the other things I've heard people make good use of is just grabbing 5 or 10 minutes to have sidebar conversations in breakout rooms to help engage the participants.
Yeah, so that's another really great tool in Zoom if you haven't used before is breakout rooms. So that's something we could practice in office hours this week if anybody's interested.
I see Nancy has her hand up. Nancy, I'm unmuting you. So if you'd like to ask your question, go ahead.
Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. My question is, we have a lot of good ideas on how to keep people engaged. Like, I don't know, scavenger hunts and those kind of things from other types of meetings. But it seems like there's a big time crunch to get through all the modules in a timely fashion. And so when we did ours a couple of weeks ago, it seemed like we were just really pushing through to try to make sure we got all the material covered. So how are you guys handling that issue?
I would say, at least in the course that I was involved with most recently, Nancy, we built that into 2 days, and we ensured that we had sort of buffer time. And indeed, we did go over, as you anticipate. And it just takes a lot more time, especially with introductions and getting the technology right. So I would encourage trainers to, it may need to be longer than a 1 day, or at least communicating that with the participants up front, that it may not be that normal 9 to 5 training. It may have to be a little bit longer if you're trying to crunch it into 1 day.
Yeah, we did it over 2 days. It was actually 4.5 hours each day. And we were just really pushing it to, and I guess it depends also on each trainer, as to how some people talk really slow and, and, if I know that we're short on time, I just like really speed up, and that's not, it's not good or bad, but I think that there's some interactions or some learnings that we're missing on, because it is kind of dry material also on some of the stuff. And so, I don't know, I try, when I usually do a PSA, I try to be a little more fun about things and ask more questions. And I feel really restricted teaching in this modem.
Yeah, It's definitely a challenge. Something else I would recommend is going back to those people who are also helping with the courses that may not be instructors. They're the timekeepers, or they're the people who are monitoring attention for the participants. Those individuals can give reminders in the chat box to the person who's speaking, you know, you've got 5 minutes left or 10 minutes left, or even do a visual if the video is up, just like you would in a normal training, but it does come with its added challenges for sure.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I recognize we're already 10 minutes over. This is great discussion. I see a lot of people are still logged in. Does anybody else want to share experience or have any other questions? While you're thinking of those last minute questions, I'm going to go back to the chat. It looks like Julia shared that they actually, at the end of one of their trainings, they had a poll of if they had to do this again in the future, would the participants prefer a remote or an in-person training? And the majority of those people actually said remote, which surprised her. So that's good feedback to know. Thanks, Julia. And then Michelle just shared, I participated in a training done face-to-face with breakout rooms. And then when they went into breakout rooms, it was challenging to hear. So they were kind of limited to talking through the chat. So there are some functionalities that, you know, like breakout rooms that do require some amount of ability to keep quiet around you and may still be limited in communication opportunities. So thanks for pointing that out. Okay, any other questions? All right, well, that was all great discussion. And again, I would like to thank our presenters, Heather and Connie and Jovana, so much for their time today. I thought that was extremely useful for so many of our trainers who are working and doing remote trainings for our current audiences. And again, I encourage you, if you're trying to gain more experience in preparing for a remote training, that you attend one of Connie's office hours, and we'll drop her email again into the chat box, but those are held on Thursdays, and any one of our team members is also willing to help you. So if you're familiar with one of our team members because they're in the region, feel free to reach out to those folks as well, and we're more than happy to jump on a Zoom and go over things with you. Connie, do you have anything else to add?
Nope, that was it.
Okay. Well, thanks again to everyone. Our next call is going to be on June 15th from 2 to 3 p.m. We're actually going to have Hans Estrin from University of Vermont Extension. He originally was scheduled to deliver Module 7 tips for how to develop a farm food safety plan all the way back in March. That unfortunately coincided with the timing of coronavirus and us having to shift gears with these remote courses, and he was very gracious in allowing us to schedule over his original time so that we could get that important information out to trainers. But we really do think Module 7 is a great area for trainers to learn some tips for delivery. So that's what we'll be doing on June 15th. I will send out that meeting information through our listserv, but you can also check the website. You also probably noticed that we now require registration, and that's primarily because of what Heather was discussing at the beginning of this meeting, was the Zoom bombing factor. So you will be required to register for these meetings. They'll always be free, they'll always be available and recorded. So always check the website. The upcoming dates along with the registration information will be available on our website as soon as we know who's up next. And if you have any suggestions for topics, please don't hesitate to share them with me or any other members of our team. So thanks everybody, and we hope you have a great week. Stay healthy.